Washington, some people say gridlock, and that makes the work of the elected officials we send there to work on our behalf, represent us, look out for us, our families, the communities we live in, so difficult. And Congresswoman Yvette Clarke is going to be my guest to tell you how hard she works in Congress to make sure that the issues President Obama spoke about in his recent State of the Union speech becomes legislation that works for you. In this program, we'll be talking about the immigration reform that affects so many people you know. We'll also be talking about two issues that affect women: violence against women and paycheck fairness. Congresswoman Clarke, welcome to Brooklyn 45.
Thank you for having me, Sam.
Well, it's always a pleasure. You know, the majority of our Brooklyn 45 team members are women. And they are, of course, interested in these two issues, the paycheck fairness legislation and violence against women.
Yes.
But I want to talk about immigration first.
Sure.
Because that affects not just men, but women. Not just women, but men. There seems to be this divide in your house.
Yes.
Can you talk about that divide?
Sure. You know, it has been since the 2010 elections that we have seen the rise of a far radical right within the Republican Party, unwilling to compromise on any issues that they believe will give President Obama a so-called win. And it's really unfortunate because in plotting his demise, we're really holding back the nation. Initially, these Tea Party candidates were there to be deficit hawks, if you will, but have turned in many instances to social issues as wedge issues and another means of trying to hold back a progressive agenda for the nation. So that is what has brought us to the point of where we are today, struggling to address the deficit through a grand bargain, which is the preference of many of us in Congress and particularly the President, which balances out our need to cut waste out of the federal government with the need to protect certain programs, whether that's Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid. It also directs us to look at investment through revenue that we can realize. But these individuals within the Republican Party have been basically the tail that has wagged the dog and has thereby created the gridlock that you described in your opening.
Of course, the Republicans have countered the DREAM Act that I know that the Democrats have been working so hard to achieve with what they term the Achieve Act. Can you explain this Achieve Act as you see it?
Well, you know, it's a mockery of what we really need is comprehensive immigration reform, and I think that that's what people need to pay attention to. They're basically picking and choosing winners in the whole spectrum of immigration. We know that people come to the United States for varying reasons. Some come for education. Others come for opportunities, whether that's employment, entrepreneurial. Some come as children due to family circumstances needing to be in the nation. What the Achieve Act would do is focus solely on bringing in those who are professionals already, those who have already attained a certain amount of academic success and would fill sort of the upper echelons of the technology and energy sector, bringing in sort of the brain power. But what that does is it neglects all those immigrants who are here stuck within the broken immigration system. It doesn't provide opportunities for those individuals to make it good with the United States and apply their talents to the growth and development of our communities. So I would ask that your audience not be fooled by the term achieve. because there are many ways of achieving, and this act that the Republicans have put forth really is discriminatory and in the way that it goes about selecting who becomes eligible as immigrants to the United States.
There's a recent poll that said that 72% of people believe that undocumented workers should be given green cards or citizenship. What's your response to that?
I mean,
I almost know your response.
Comprehensive immigration reform is a concept whose time has come. We recognize that for so many families living amongst us, this is an imperative, and it's reached a fever pitch here in the United States when you look at the numbers of young people whose lives are sort of in limbo and whose lives are really being diminished by an inability to go on to education, to serve in the armed services, or to be entrepreneurs, to be employed, quite frankly. And, you know, again, we've reached that tipping point where Americans recognize that this is a very valuable asset that we have sort of marginalized in the conversations about who becomes American, and we need to manage it differently, and comprehensive immigration reform is the way to go.
What is your take about Mario Rubio, who is this new Republican star? What is your take on his path to citizenship?
Marco Rubio, well, he is a new so-called rising star of the Republican Party. He's Cuban, so his immigrant experience is different from the average immigrant coming to the United States, in that his ancestry has been given asylum in the United States as a result of Cuba being a communist nation. There's a lot less of a challenge for those who are Cuban descent to come to the United States and to be fast-tracked into green cards and citizenship. So I'm glad that he sees the need to do comprehensive immigration reform. I differ from him on a number of issues, one being you know, how onerous the earned citizenship becomes in terms of finances for people. We're very concerned about that. And I would say that would probably be the only area. I mean, a lot of what he has put forth has been similar to what has already been drafted in legislation by Democrats, which is why, you know, I'm kind of baffled by him trying to make a distinction that indicates that he's come up with a solution that, you know, quite frankly, had already been in discussion already.
I think he attempted to preempt President Obama and then realized he had no place to run.
Exactly. Interesting.
There's an interesting bill in Arizona that gives police the power to stop people and check their immigration status on their daily rounds. I hope that doesn't happen here. But what is your take on that?
Well, I mean, it was meant to signal to undocumented individuals that you have to fear law enforcement, that you have to fear being a resident of Arizona, and likewise Alabama, where in Alabama they took things a step forward by saying that any citizen who came in contact with someone who was undocumented had an obligation and would bear liability if they didn't turn that individual in. So that if you had students using a public library in Alabama and the librarian suspected that they were undocumented, she could request to see their documents, and if they're unable to show it, would be under obligation by law to turn them in. So, you know, those areas had some very draconian measures that they put forth, really to scare the undocumented population, to exercise some level of authority and power over their daily lives, which was very vindictive and extremely unproductive. And I had the occasion to travel to Alabama, actually, to work with my colleague Terry Sewells, the Congresswoman of Birmingham, Alabama, to fight against this type of legislation.
Sounds like stop and frisk and immigration and immigration aside, stop and frisk?
Oh, well, it's very similar, and not to negate what has happened here in New York, an outgrowth of stop and frisk is actually ensnaring young people who are undocumented. The moment that they are run through the system, they're flagged, so they become deportable, even if they're residents of the United States. Once you are convicted of an offense, and it could be a very minor one, it could be an aggravated felony or misdemeanors, that can actually revoke your residency and make you deportable.
Let's talk about Violence Against Women's Act.
Yes.
Now, we know the Republicans in Congress have refused to reauthorize this. What is the problem?
Well, it's the House of Representatives that has the problem at this stage. We're fortunate in that the Senate ultimately has passed the Violence Against Women Act. Again, you know, this all falls into line with the way that the Republicans have been conducting themselves in the House of Representatives. There has been a war on women. It's very obvious. You know, when you look at the commentary in this last political season of many of the Republican candidates about women's reproductive rights and, you know, just a whole host of issues that we have been struggling with, this is very much in keeping with the philosophy that they have espoused. And one of the areas that they have had particular issue with in the Violence Against Women Act is the protections given to Native American women in reservations, and their ability to bring charges against individuals who may be non-Indian, non-Native, and brought to reservations before tribal tribunals. That was something that some of the Republican members were against, as well as protecting women who are gay, LGBT women. They didn't want to extend those protections to those women at all. So, I mean, I just think that, you know, it speaks to a lot of the bias, a lot of the discrimination that has characterized many within the Republican Party, that we're at this stage where it's now in the court of the House of Representatives, and we have members, particularly in the Republican Party, who still stand in the way of its passage.
What do you see as the likely and hopefully soon to be accomplished outcome?
Well, you know, the Speaker has had to make a number of maneuvers over the past couple of months since the beginning of the session, where he's able to find reasonable Republicans, work with the minority to pass legislation, and unfortunately that may be the only pathway to getting a lot of this legislation done. The Violence Against Women Act is actually at the point of where it needs to be reauthorized. It was the law of the land, and unfortunately it had a sunset provision in it, which to me doesn't make any sense, and that needs to be dealt with. But be that as it may, we have a pathway to passing this legislation. It's really up to the Speaker to demonstrate leadership and courage to bring it before the body for a vote.
I told some people that we were going to be discussing this, and someone sent this question. Why is it that it only specifies women when we know that men are also victims of abuse? Well,
you know, we know that women have traditionally not had the type of force of law behind the types of violent acts that have been perpetrated against them.
Yes.
And, you know, women in our civil society have for a long time been discriminated against. When you go back into the annals of our history, we know that women were seen as property to the men that they were married to. This is all an evolutionary process, and we need to be able to provide, particularly for women, this extra added specter of protection, so that, you know, they can go on to live their lives and be productive in our civil society, not fearing any retribution that may come from either the men in their lives or men within their sphere of operation.
Recently, Rihanna reconciled with her abuser.
Yeah.
And said that his actions were perhaps a result of his experiences growing up. How does the act educate women that situations like this perpetuate this pattern of behavior and does not really protect them?
Well, listen, each woman has to go through their own experiences, unfortunately. All we can do is provide for them what the statistics have said, what has been a pattern and practice of abusers, and then they will be the determinations of their fate, the determiners of their fate.
Yes.
It is important that women find the ability to come together, to have these conversations, and I think that this act creates that space for medical professionals to be able to engage women and provide them with the information they need to be safe.
Yes, there are some statistics that say that lower income women are 3 times the risk of being abused, and as a result of that, are more likely to stay with their partner because of their economic dependence.
That tends to be one of the challenging pieces, and one of the things that has been very helpful in a city like New York is that we've created safe havens for women in those types of circumstances where they can leave and enter into a transitional housing environment that helps to equip them with the skills to actually be out there and able to make it on their own without being concerned about the economics of it all.
We know that there are these orders of protection that are meant to protect women,
That's
but
right.
what else is there?
Well, again, I think that there have been a number of what I would consider to be progressive programs, particularly those that enable women to leave their abusers and get into a system that protects them and their identities and gives them the support system they need to start anew in another place, another city, another town. And we need to maximize on those types of programs that give women safe haven.
Going back to the Violence Against Women's Act, are there any new benefits or changes that may be included in its renewal or reauthorization?
From what I understand, the main provisions that were added to this was that for Native Americans and women in the LGBT community.
Why wouldn't the Republicans just amend the bill or introduce a new bill to deal with that? Just make that not a problem at all.
Well, listen.
Maybe I shouldn't be asking you that question.
Yeah, it's almost rhetorical, but, again, there has been a consistent drumbeat from the Republican Party, in particular, the men of the Republican Party, that has been very hostile to the growth and development of women in our civil society, that has, for a party that wants government out of their lives, they've seemed to find ways in which to impose government into the lives of women through their rhetoric. And so I just think that there are just some issues that they need to deal with, but we need not be obsessed with or distracted by, but to focus on what we know makes all the difference in a civil society such as ours.
Many men are ordered to attend some type of anger management programs. But what do you think about systems that could be in place for men to recognize that they have a problem and to be able to deal with these problems? I know you're not a sociologist or a psychologist. But,
right.
You may have been asked this question, by members of your own constituency.
Well, I just think that it's important that peer pressure be applied oftentimes. And unfortunately, there are situations where there can be interventions, but I don't know whether it's the male ego or it's just not a topic that men tackle one with another. But I think that can be a place where we can make some strides, is creating sort of a peer group scenario, or peer groups throughout, whether it's through our clergy or through other social organizations that men avail themselves of, where we can have those types of conversations and they can be given the type of counseling and support that helps to modify behavior. Oftentimes, I think you mentioned this with respect to the Rihanna Chris Brown scenario, men's behaviors are a reflection of some of what they experienced in their childhood, and that was never reconciled. And so I think, you know, the more that we invest in some sort of peer management program, whether it's, again, through religious institutions or social organizations, we may be able to turn that corner. Men may be able to share more of their emotional challenges with their peers and come up with solutions that don't call for violent action.
What's been the response of men in your constituency to the Violence Against Women Act as a piece of legislation?
Well, you know, there hasn't been a whole lot of discussion, which leads me to believe that men are much more supportive overall than most people would believe. That it's a small minority that would want to exploit this opportunity not to pass it, but most men want to see women protected and want to be part of making sure that that happens.
I was hoping to get a 10-minute wrap-up, and they just gave me a 5-minute wrap-up.
Oh, my goodness.
And I really want to talk about the Paycheck Fairness Act.
Yes.
Because so many women are concerned about this. What exactly is this act?
Well, what the Paycheck Fairness Act does is it really looks at the fact that women have been underpaid compared to their male counterparts in varying professions. And what it does is it sends a signal to private industry that that is unacceptable. There would be sanctions involved. Department of Labor at the federal level will be engaged to make sure that this discriminatory practice is not furthered. It gives women the ability to actually bring suit against their employer for employment discrimination. And I think that that's a very important tool because for white women, they're being paid around 70 cents to the dollar to their male counterparts, and for black women, it's even less. It's something like 63 cents. And this is the 21st century. I just can't believe that we're dealing with this issue. One would have believed that that would have been dealt with years ago, but in private industry, unfortunately, that is not the case.
That's correct. I was reading a newspaper today that quoted a lady who was a vice president of New York Women's Agenda, who said that her experiences with pay inequity informed her women's right work today, and that this is something we shouldn't be talking about anymore. We should be done with it. What are your thoughts about this coming from a woman?
Well, we shouldn't be talking about it anymore because men and women should be paid for the same thing for the same work. And I'm assuming that's where she was coming from here.
I didn't think so, but...
Well, I hope so.
Yes.
Because, you know, one would not believe that it's such an advanced civil society, that level of blatant discrimination still exists. And, you know, the gender inequity has to be dispensed with. We need to make sure that everyone's talents are valued the same in our society from this generation forward.
One concerned writer asked me to ask, will the Paycheck Fairness Act primarily benefit women who work in the corporate and service arena?
I think it will affect any woman who is being underpaid, irregardless and irrespective of where that employment takes place.
I would think so as well. So what, in relation to what you were saying earlier, obviously employers will no longer be able to hide behind this, or they'll no longer be able to hide behind their unfair pay practices under the guise of confidentiality.
Right. Exactly. You know, I am assuming that we will be able to marshal the attorney generals of the state level, at the federal level, as well as Department of Labor, state level and federal level to come up with rules and protocol for implementation of the law, and that there will be a call for transparency around payment schedules and the like. So I'm excited about it. I'm hoping that we'll pass this soon, so that we can get on with the business of this not being an issue.
Do you anticipate a backlash from large corporations?
Listen, I don't see how that can be the case. Talent is talent, and they need the talent.
Even if the talent is female?
That's right.
And most corporations are, well...
It's not that these women aren't being hired. It's that they're being underpaid.
Yes, yes, indeed. One person said to me, most of these corporations are headed by men.
That's right.
And
and a lot of it also had to do with negotiation skills. Women aren't told what their male counterparts are being paid. You come in with a lower expectation around compensation to begin with, just by virtue of not having that negotiation skill or ability, or being advised as to how to go about negotiating. I think all of that will become made much more transparent once paycheck fairness is passed.
Okay, Congresswoman Clarke, I want to thank you for coming on Brooklyn 45. I wanted to talk about gun control. We don't have the time. We're out of time. I'm going to have to invite you back another time when you have recess.
That's right.
And you're down here in Brooklyn. Thank you so much for coming to Brooklyn 45.
Thank you for having me. Thank you.
And I'm sure our viewers are pleased to be able to listen to you and have so many of their questions answered. This is Brooklyn 45. I'm Sam Taitt.